intro. Hang on. Okay. And I'm just looking down the list of students. I actually know most of you. so I don't think I need much introduction, but for those several that I have not met yet, I am the pre-health professions advisor for the university. This is finishing my 18th year at UNC Charlotte doing this advising. And so it's a pleasure to talk with you all today. I can't tell you how challenging it is to try to fit this topic into a 45 minute presentation. I do a lot of interview prep work with students during interview season, and the med school interview prep that I do in small groups, and it's usually about an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes by the time we get done with everybody's questions and concerns. So I'm just going to pull out just a few highlights to talk about today. But for those of you that are going to be applying this summer and interviewing this fall and winter, just please know that I am available for interview prep to help you get ready. And so let me get going here with some slides. So it's been very interesting over the last several years to look at how interviews have had to respond to the pandemic. Before the pandemic, med schools swore they would never do virtual interviews. And the biggest reasons why was because they were afraid of imposters and they were afraid of off-screen coaching while the student was being interviewed. And those things actually, you can't believe the links that people will go to get into medical school. And as an example, I was at a conference, this has been a number of years ago, but they were talking about doing retinal scans to be sure that the person that took the MCAT was the same person who showed up for interview day, was the same person who showed up on the first day of medical school. So it's really amazing the links that people will go to beat the system and try to get into professional schools. So the policy was no virtual interviews. And the only time I would ever see a rare exception, there were several medical schools that if the applicant was currently enlisted in Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and they were deployed overseas, sometimes they would Skype interview that person just because for the obvious reason there was no way for that person to get back to the States to interview under those circumstances. But other than that, it was no way, no way. And then the pandemic happens, and guess what? They had to respond by offering virtual interviews. It was either don't interview or change the format. So all medical schools flipped to a virtual interview format during the first and second pandemic years. This current cycle that we're in, we're finishing a cycle that started last summer. And it's been interesting to watch schools make this decision about, are we going to go back to in-person interviews or are we going to stick with virtual? And a number of schools are still sticking with virtual. Actually, it's a fairly large number of schools are still doing virtual interviews. We do have some they're doing in person, and a very tiny number are giving students the option to pick a virtual or in-person interview day. So that's been interesting to watch over the years. There are advantages and disadvantages to both formats, and the biggest advantage for virtual is that students don't have to budget money for travel. So pre-pandemic, all interviews were in person, and students had to budget, gas money or airplane ticket, hotel stay for most schools, feeding themselves. And that's an awful lot of money on top of the large cost to take an MCAT and to apply to medical school. It's not a cheap process. So that's been the big advantage of virtual interviews, is that money can be redistributed to help pay for the application and MCAT prep. And also students can usually apply to a larger number of schools because they have the money to apply to more schools than they would have if they were saving for airfare. So that's been probably the biggest advantage to students with virtual interviews. The flip side of that coin is that I have students who contact me saying, I have this acceptance, or I have 2 or 3 acceptances, and I don't know if I want to go to any of them because I've never seen them. So it's hard to commit 4 years to medical school when you've never set foot on the campus of the school. Most medical schools are trying to give students an option, accepted students an option for a visiting day where they can come and meet personnel and students at the medical school, get tours of the school and tours of campus, and you're just trying to do as best they can to familiarize the accepted student with the medical school before they have to make their final decision of where to attend. Most schools are not offering that to students who do not have an acceptance. So most of these accepted students days have been majority this spring, but at least they're trying to give students a chance to visit in person. what does an interview day consist of? And certainly there are variations on this theme, but this is how most medical schools do it. The interview group, the group of students who are being interviewed will start with a welcome session, and usually the dean of admissions and sometimes the dean of the medical school itself will come and talk to students. And they'll welcome students and congratulate them for being a part of the interview day. And they'll talk a little bit about what to expect during the course of the day. Then oftentimes there'll be a scholarship or financial aid session. All medical schools have somebody at the school whose sole responsibility it is to guide students through this process of how to pay for medical school. So that's a typical session that's included. Tour of the medical school, 100% of the time you'll have that. Of course, with the virtual interview format, it's a video tour of the medical school. And some schools will also have a bus to put students on to take them around the campus itself so they can see the whole university or college, and not just be limited to the medical school alone. There is almost always a meet the students session, which usually occurs over a continental breakfast or a brunch or a light lunch. The person leading the tour is almost always a student, so that they definitely try to have students available for interviewees to ask questions and talk to during interview day. And then there are the actual interviews, and then there's usually a closing or wrap-up type of session, a summary session at the end of the day. What often happens is that they will split students into groups. So group A might be doing their actual interviews while group B is doing their tours, and then they will flip and exchange places. So it's hard to interview 30 or 40 students and have everybody interviewing at the same time. They don't have that many interviewers. So it's very common to divide everybody into groups and send you on different experiences. But typically, these are all the sessions that you would get on an interview day. Interview formats, this also used to be a pretty easy topic because medical school interviews historically were always one-on-one, and you usually had 2 one-on-one interviews, and that was how interviews were done. And then we started seeing some variations on that theme. The panel interview, this is an interviewer panel interview. And this means that it's you and several of us. And the number of us would be 2 to 5. Typically, I've heard of larger panels, but usually it's 2 to 5. And so with one student. This is not a common interview format, but I'm mentioning it because it does exist. It's out there. So you should know that it's out there, but it's not a common situation. Group interviews are becoming more and more common, and you will see these most often with osteopathic medical schools. Those schools, almost all of them, use a group learning or team-based learning curriculum. And so if you're going to be learning in teams and going through medical school with a lot of team activities, team learning activities, they want to see how you, if you play nice with others. So it's very common to have group interviews, and those usually will be typically 3 to 5 students and several interviewers on the other side conducting the interview. Some schools either replace the group interview with a group activity or add a group activity to the group interview. And group activities, typically this is meant to be a fun situation. So they'll put several students in a room and give you a problem to solve or a puzzle to solve or a prompt to respond to. And then typically after 20, 25 minutes, the group gives their solution to the puzzle or the prompt. There are stories out there from reliable sources that some schools during this group activity will have a microphone in the room to listen to how the group interacts. I've heard of one-way glass being used in combination with a microphone to watch and listen to how students interact. Those 2 things are very uncommon, but if you hear that, there is some truth to that. But again, it's very unusual that schools do spy on you while you're doing the group activity. But that is definitely out there, especially at DO schools. The multiple mini interview, this is a phenomenon that started about maybe 10, 12 years ago. It started in Canada at, I believe it was McMaster Medical School in Canada. And most of you have heard of this, and most students will liken this to speed dating. And so if you picture a hallway with rooms off the hallway, a hotel hallway or a academic building hallway on campus with multiple rooms off the side, the way that this is conducted, they will have the doors to the rooms will be closed, and taped on the door or taped on the wall beside the door or on a table by the door will be a piece of paper with a prompt. Typically, students are directed, there'll be 1 student in front of each door. You will start with your back to the door and the prompt. A bell or buzzer will ring, and you will be allowed to turn around and read the prompt. Typically, you've got minutes to read that prompt, and then a bell or buzzer will sound and you enter the room and deal with the prompt. Time in the room varies greatly from school to school. It can be 5 minutes, it's kind of the short end. It can be up to 8 minutes at the long end, but 5 to 8 minutes in the room. Bell or buzzer, everybody exits the room, advances to the next door, and turns their back to the door and waits for the next bell or buzzer to go off. What are the prompts? The prompts can be very simple things like common interview questions, like tell me a little bit about yourself. It could be that simple. At the other extreme, there may be 1 or 2 people in the room who are actors, and you will enter and play along in a scenario. And there will be somebody in the room who acts as a rater to rate your response and how you handle the prompt. MMIs take a lot of training for the school to conduct. They have to train raters, train any actors that they're using in the rooms. And it takes a lot of people, so they're very labor intensive. And for that reason, not all schools even want to get involved with MMIs, so they avoid it. But we do have a reasonable number of schools that do use these. And again, a classic MMI would be 10 stations with 10 minutes per station, 2 minutes in the hall and 8 minutes in the room. The prompts, by the way, have nothing to do with science and math. This is all designed to check soft skills like empathy, teamwork, ethical behavior, communication skills, initiative, resilience. So it's kind of touchy-feely scenarios, not science and math. Then we have the student interview. This is not common, but it's not uncommon. So it's definitely out there at some schools. And some schools just like to have a medical student, 1 or 2 students interview the candidate and kind of get a student perspective, with the students looking at the interviewee through the lens of, would I like to have this person as a classmate? Would I like to have this person representing my medical school? And sometimes students see things that faculty miss. So that's why some schools like to do this. These interviews are usually shorter than the traditional interview formats. And what's becoming very common these days is to have a mixture of these formats. So you might have one-on-one and then a 5-station MMI, or a panel interview followed by a group interview. So these kind of hybrid situations are becoming quite common. As far as just real basic how to get ready for an interview, I go into much more depth in the interview prep sessions. But these are the 4 things that I recommend students do. Number 1 and 2 will take most of the time. Number 3 and 4 usually don't take much time at all. So number 1, know your applications. Everything you have sent to the school, which will be your primary application and your secondary application. And by the way, primary means AMCAS or ACOMAS. Know your application. So read it, reread it, and reread it again so that you don't get into the interview and say something contrary to what you said on these applications. And also to be familiar with the things that you've written about, because anything you sent to the school is fair game for the school to ask about in an interview. So read and reread and be familiar with it. And also try to poke holes in yourself. I know it sounds kind of weird, but ask yourself, do I have any weak areas, anything that's puzzling or confusing that I might need to explain, and be prepared to explain it. It's very unusual, by the way, to get a student in an interview and ask about NCAT scores and grades. It happens, but it's actually quite uncommon. But I think the worst thing that could happen to a student is you go to an interview being unprepared to talk about weak areas, and then you get the question. So it's far better to prepare for it and never get it, which is what usually happens, than to be unprepared and get the question. Know the medical school. You're not expected to be an expert on the medical school, by the way. So as you're coming through the medical school website and trying to absorb bits and pieces, I feel like you have to know everything. That is definitely not expected. But you should know basics like class size. You should look at the curriculum and see what the basic game plan is for the curriculum. You should look for things like outreach programs and student support services. Some students might be interested in grading policies and attendance policies and dress codes. What's important to some of you will be very unimportant to others of you, and vice versa. So I think it's very important and useful to start thinking along the lines of, what would I like in the medical school that I attend? Would I like to be in a class of 250 students? Might I rather be in a class of 80? Do you want to go to school in the middle of New York City and live in New York City for 4 years? Or might you want to be in more of a suburban campus, maybe like a little more of a rural setting? So these type of things, how far do you want to be from friends and family? Those type of things are important to consider as well. And one thing that's being very overlooked in recent years that I'm seeing among students is totally ignoring the mission statement. And these are super important. I want to emphasize that schools are very proud about their mission statements. They're very guarded about their mission statements. And every student that they admit, they will expect fits their mission statement. So they're always looking for students who connect to the mission statement and those who disconnect. And so be sure you're familiar with the mission statement. Don't say anything that goes against the mission statement. And also be sure that you fit the mission statement. I don't think you'd want to go to a medical school and spend 4 years somewhere where they're trying to have an emphasis on things that don't interest you. Number 3 and 4, don't take much time, but be familiar with a larger college or university. There's no medical school that sits out in the middle of a pasture by itself. It's part of a college structure or university structure or healthcare college structure. So just know the basics. What's the mascot? How many students are at the university? And most importantly, look to see if they have other healthcare programs. Is there a dental school, a pharmacy school, a PA program? And know what they have. Be familiar with the geographic area, and this is more for your own happiness, human happiness, than anything else. And again, some people would not be happy going to school up north where it's this cold in winter for 6-7 months out of the year. You may not want to be 3,000 miles away from your friends and family. I think the most important thing with this is to ask yourself, what do I need to be a happy human being outside of school? And be very sure that that's going to be available to you there in the area where the medical school is, whether it's sports you like to play, music, food, place of worship, people you want to associate and affiliate with, people who share common beliefs, etc. So be sure this is self-care. It is so important because you don't want to go to medical school and be unhappy for 4 years. And medical schools don't want you to be unhappy for 4 years. So be sure that what you need to be a happy human is going to be available to you in that area. Of all the interview questions out there, and there are documents out there where people have tried to compile all the interview questions for med school. Of course, it's impossible, but I've seen documents with literally hundreds of questions on them. There are 4 questions that you will have in pretty much every interview that you will go to. The classic first question in any interview is, tell me a little bit about yourself. There are different opinions on how to handle this question. My advice is to give a very brief autobiographical answer. And some of the key things that interviewers will want to know about you in this response are to have a sense of the environment that you come from, that you grew up in. They want to know about your journey to medicine, especially any hurdles or challenges that you faced, and how you got over, around, or under those hurdles and challenges. Definitely tell your interviewer when you finish telling them about yourself what you love to do outside of school. You want to come across as a multidimensional individual, not just a library dweller. So tell your interviewer what you love to do outside of school in your free time. I also recommend not launching into the whole why you want to be a doctor when answering this first question, because that wasn't the question. And it tends to annoy interviewers when students answer the question and then start adding additional things that have nothing to do with the question that was asked. So, and the other reason for making that recommendation is because the second question in most interviews is going to be, why do you want to be a physician? Why do you want to do this? And this answer has to be very specific. It can't be, I want to help people. That can be part of your answer, but it needs to be much more mature than I just want to help people. And you need to support your reasons. It's not enough to give a reason, this, and this. You need to tell the interviewer the whys, or how you came to that, to value that reason. Maybe it was through patient care experiences, maybe it was through a research experience, but support your reasons with things that you've done or insights that you've gained from your pre-med experiences or life experiences. It's very important to support your reasons. The third one, why are you applying to us? This is also an answer that really needs to be pretty much bullet point specific. And this is how most people answer this question. I applied to you because you have this, you offer that, I'll have opportunities to do these things. And really all the student has done is tell me what I already know that my medical school has and offers. So the way that you hit the home run with this answer is you say, I applied to you because you offer this, and that's important to me because I'll have opportunities to do this, and that's really exciting to me because it's the why. You have to tell your interviewer why. So why each of your reasons, why it's important, why it's meaningful, why it's exciting, why you're passionate about it. That's how you nail down that answer. And then expect that every interview will end with, do you have any questions for me, the interviewer? And it is considered a big mistake not to ask questions. So I always encourage students before interview day to pre-prepare 5 to 6 questions. You're not going to ask 5 or 6, but this way, if some of the questions get answered during the course of the interview, you'll have a couple more hopefully to draw from. And I encourage students to ask 2 questions. Ask one question about the medical school itself, and ask the second question about life outside of the medical school, because you want to impress your interviewer that you're a mature applicant and you're looking at the whole kit and caboodle. So many students just focus on the medical school and never think about living there for 4 years. So by asking this question about life outside of the medical school, you're sending that signal to your interviewer. I've done my homework and my research on the medical school, and I'm also considering I'm going to be living here for 4 years. And that's a very positive signal to send to your interviewer. I want to end with a little bit of interview advice, and I guess we can get to questions and any questions or concerns that you may have. So these are some quotes that I've heard over the years that I use in interview prep, and I think they are fantastic to keep in mind on interview day. Enter that space, being the medical school, the interview space, with humility and gratitude. I love the second one: be enthusiastic, energetic, and committed. And that means committed not only to medicine, but committed to the school. And that doesn't mean telling them, that you're my first choice and I'll forsake everybody else, but showing your commitment by being well prepared, being well researched, and being enthusiastic about being part of that entering medical school class and part of that medical school culture. That's what I mean by committed. This is a handout that Duke used to come to campus. Sadly, the admissions director moved on, but I used to have him come every year, and he had a handout he gave students, and these are the main points on that handout. And the handout opens with, in big bold letters, number 1, most important thing, be respectful. And to which is added on the handout, don't be late. I cannot overemphasize how big of a stain it is on your interview score and impression you leave with the school if you're late. So don't be late, don't be late, don't be late. Don't carry what you don't need. I've heard some very humorous anecdotes about interviewees, carrying like enormous purses, like big enough to hold most everything that the student owns. I hear stories about students thinking that it's cool to take things for show and tell. It's like taking a guitar and things like these things are just all way off base. So don't carry what you don't need. Don't be arrogant or confrontational. Don't talk too much. In other words, when you're asked a question, answer it, but be respectful of your interviewer and don't just keep talking and talking and talking. They will have to interrupt you and ask you to be quiet, and you don't want that to happen. Do be well prepared. Do be well dressed and conservative dress. And by the way, even in the virtual interviews, you are expected to treat your dress and appearance as if it was an in-person interview. I've heard some admissions deans talk about, with virtual interviews over the last couple of years, about people who didn't comb their hair, people who they just rolled out of bed with a t-shirt and things like that. I mean, I just can't even imagine why that's thought of as cool to do. It's not. So even though it's virtual, suit and tie for the guys, and an appropriate attire for the gals. And again, I'm glad to go into that in more detail if you have questions. And again, the handout wraps up with do be humble, be gracious, and be honest. So that's all I had. So I guess I'll open up the floor then. Questions? Nobody?
Hi, Dr. Hanie. I'm not sure if I've asked you this before, but I feel like most of the people in this meeting are applying this coming cycle. So our interviews will be probably mid next fall. What resources do we have on campus to help us improve our practice for these interviews? Because personally, I'm very nervous about it, and I'd like to be over prepared before I walk in. So
yeah. So I always recommend to students, if they want to practice, I do not do mock interviews. I haven't done them in many years. And the biggest reason why, because I know that sounds kind of curious, but the biggest reason why is because by the point of the mock interviews, usually students know me, and there's no lack of familiarity and lack of nerves typically. So I think it's more to the student's benefit to be in an unfamiliar environment and to have this experience. And you're very fortunate because the Career Center does these mock interviews. And if you will tell them that this is for medical school, they will tailor the questions. in that direction and give you feedback on answers and also how you come across. So I'm going to let the Career Center talk a little bit more about this and how to schedule and those type of details. Somebody wants to hop in. Anybody from the Career Center want to hop in on
Yes,
how to schedule?
absolutely. Yes, Liz, you're exactly right. So you can, if you have a Hire Niner account, which I hope you do, you can go into Hire Niner and make an appointment with Brandy or Tiara or any of the coaches in the Career Center and request a interview session, so practice interview session. And so exactly what Liz says, put that in the notes of what your interview you would like it to kind of be in preparation for. So medical school, if you can be as detailed as possible, then they're going to cater it as close as possible to what you write the notes of, so that they're going to treat it like a real interview. So as soon as you walk in, are you late? Are you dressed professionally? And then they actually have a document that they will fill out to critique you, and we'll send that back to you and give you that information right away as soon as you're done with that interview. Now, there is another resource that I'm going to share with you in the chat. It is called Big Interview. So I'm going to put this in the chat for everyone. So make sure you check out this platform. It's amazing. You can practice in the comfort of your own home in front of your computer. You can record yourself. You can find interview questions for admissions, for medical school, for an internship. You have behavioral questions built in there. There are videos. There is so much in this platform. And so all you need to do is log in with your NinerNet ID. And so make sure you check out the Big Interview platform and maybe practice on there a little bit on your own. And then when you're ready for that kind of face-to-face interview prep, you can set an appointment with Brandy and Tiara. Now, we also have virtual appointments as well. So there's a lot of options for you. Now, if you are in a rush and you're like, I've got my interview tomorrow and I don't have an appointment because Brandy and Tiara have been booked, you can just walk into our office and get some sort of help with our drop-in hours.
Thank you, Jessica.
You're welcome.
And I want to mention two other things. If you have a virtual interview, I strongly encourage you before interview day to video yourself answering common interview questions with your setup. The setup is super important as far as being in a quiet location. You want a very simple background that has nothing distracting and nothing divisive or hot button to push anybody's buttons in the background. So very simple background. And be sure that the lighting is good. I've heard of many complaints from schools about poor front lighting. So the student has light out here and the face is really dark. A ring light will help solve that problem. And you can buy those on Amazon. There's a brand called Neewer, Neewer. And I've had students, and there are other brands too, but that one in particular has worked well for students. So be sure that your front lighting is good. And be sure that your audio and video is clear. So sit in front of your setup and answer interview questions. And I do encourage you at some point to actually video yourself and then self-critique or show it to friends. And be sure that you don't have any annoying mannerisms or things, shadows that are causing issues, those type of things. The other thing, pre-pandemic, we did this a couple of times with the Career Center. We actually I worked with the Career Center to host a mock MMI day, and we obviously had to put that aside during the pandemic, and maybe that's something we can work on again to offer that to students. Those were very successful and very well attended, so maybe we can get that up and running again. But thanks for the question. Anybody else?
Liz, I think there's a question. Is the process the same for vet school interviews? So is it the same layout or is it different?
As far as interview formats and things?
Yes.
Well, okay, let's start with this. And I'm a veterinarian, so this has been super interesting in recent years. There are veterinary schools that do not interview any longer. They've quit. And NC State is one of those schools. Now they might decide to start interviewing again next year, but they haven't interviewed for probably 8-9 years. So, and there are other vet schools that do not interview. They feel like they get enough information from the students' applications and recommendation letters to make their decisions. For the schools that do still interview, and there's a fair number of those, it would be similar. Everything I said would be similar, except MMI would not be a common interview format for vet school. I think there may be a couple of schools that use it, but it would not be widespread. The group interview situation would also not be common on those interview days. But pretty much as far as, answering the questions that I pointed out and getting ready, it would be the same, just put veterinary medical instead of medical. And come see me if I can be of any help. Anything else?
No other questions?
Let me off easy. Wow.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Liz, for this. This was very informative for myself, and I'm sure it was for students as well. And of course, we look forward to collaborating with you a little more this upcoming academic year. And students, thank you all for coming and showing up, and feel free to join any of our other events that are happening for the remainder of the week. Jessica, Brandy, anything to add?
No, I think that's it. Thanks everyone for coming. Make sure you check out our website if you are interested in the rest of the events. We have a banner up on our website. Just click on that and they'll take you to the list of events.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Enjoy the rest of
everyone.
your day.
Have a great day. Thanks, Liz.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.